this week on the Shameless podcast.
So to start off, why is mining so important?
Yeah, I think mining is still a very large contributor to economic growth, especially on the African continent. I guess most of the critical minerals that are in demand at the moment are being extracted in Africa.
So a lot of younger people are very against mining. You see protests around the world, we don't want you to mine in this area. And they'll be tweeting that through the phones that would not be in their hands if it wasn't for mining.
I think we want to live in a fairy tale sometimes, where our actions and the consequences of our actions are completely separated from each other. But when you go into some of the details and you go in a bit deeper, you see that there's a lot of work that's actually been going on. And so the conversations need to not be sort of emotional one, that yes, you're digging a hole, but as you dig a hole, there are controls that are possible to put in place to try to make sure that you minimize the impact or you regenerate spaces and or ecosystems that allow for life to thrive and flourish over and beyond how you might have found it anyways.
When I look at where mining is actually happening and the state of those countries, and then what you guys are saying here, but I'm looking at the countries that have these mines and unemployment rates is at double digits. I'm looking at infrastructure in those countries being, little to non-existent. Sure. Why do you think that is?
Firstly, when countries are endowed with natural resources, they tend to suffer from so-called Dutch disease. The Dutch disease is a resource curse.
Okay.
Put it in another way. Africa and a lot of other countries, for that matter, still suffer from that. The second issue related to that is the fact that there are very poor governance structures that can actually regulate all of the activities in those industries.
If you look at quite a lot of mining companies, they would form a large part of the contribution to the GDP within any country. They would actually physically be handing over a lot of money to the government. And then the question then becomes, to the governance piece, like, what then do they do with that money?
Sometimes we are afraid to do something. You fear shame. I don't want shame. We're trying to break that burden by sharing stories of courage, resilience, and we want to be able to celebrate your story.
Shameless.
Hi, my name is Nono Bokete, and I am the CEO and founder of Data Sentinels, an AI, data science, and digital transformation firm. And I'm also the Chief Ambassador of Transformation Leader. We are here on Shameless Podcast in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I'm joined by amazing guests who have extensive experience in mining for our very special session in our Mine Tech Corner. And I would like them to introduce themselves. I'd like you guys to tell me your name, first and last, and one interesting fact about yourself that few people know. And then the last thing is a misconception around mining that people should know about. And we'll start with you.
Thank you, Nono. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Shabir Ahmed, and I'm an industry advisor to energy and resources companies. Interesting fact about myself that many people probably don't know. I was a teacher in a previous life, a math and science teacher.
Oh.
Something about mining, where I think there's misconceptions. Mining often perceived as a very dirty industry. Okay, that's not necessarily true. A child plays in dirt, a child gets dirty. Miners work in dirt. They have to get dirty.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily a dirty industry.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you.
And my name is Dzikamai Gangaidzo, and I was going to say I'm the host, but
you are technically you are the host.
Yeah,
crashing.
No, but I'm a mining professional, and I've got a passion for both, not only mining but also technology, and how those two worlds sort of merge together. And an interesting thing about myself is that I actually really wanted to go into medicine at some point in previous life. And but after I saw a blast, I was like, no, this is that. And this is the actual real MVP. And that's how I ended up in mining. And then the misconception about mining is, I think the community that you live within when you're working on a mine is so small and can be also quite challenging, because you are detached from everything around, like the normal life that people go through. And so, having been on site for a long period of time, it's a very different world that you live in. And then when you come back to reality, you sort of had to climatize back into that. So I think it's a thing that people don't know about much, and they don't necessarily appreciate. And I always just find it fascinating when I see somebody who is from the mine site in the normal world, and I'm like, oh, so you're functioning fine? You've got options, and you're managing just okay. So those would be the two things as an introduction to myself.
Well, thank you. So to start off, I just wanted to understand from both of you, why is mining so important? You hear a lot of people talking about mining. It's in like economic strategies, it's in budgets. Mining has its own budget line. A lot of emphasis and focus on mining, not only on the African continent, but globally. So from you, why do you think that it's important?
Yeah, I think mining is still a very large contributor to economic growth, especially on the African continent. I guess most of the critical minerals that are in demand at the moment are being extracted in Africa. In other parts of the world, you also have a similar situation. So there's no doubt that mining is an important contributor to GDP, to many economies, developing economies and developed economies. The other aspect is that it plays a very important role because it's a job creator. Mining is a labor-intensive occupation. It relies on a significant amount of labor. So, especially in developing countries where there is a serious problem with job availability, the mines are a key contributor to employment opportunities for very large populations.
And maybe if I can add, I think when I'll use COVID as an example. When we weren't able to travel, when we weren't able to bring things in, you started to see that countries need to be more self-sufficient, more self-sustaining. And so for countries to be able to generate enough copper, or to have the ability to get, acquire, or have enough copper to be able to generate enough electricity for their future generations, that becomes a strategic and a critical part of any country's national security. And so I think that from the copper or gold or any minerals, critical minerals point of view, it underpins the ability for the government to actually be able to function and to continue function into the future as you expand and grow. We will not need less of pretty much anything going forward. We'll continue needing more. And it's about how then do we secure that ability to acquire any of these critical minerals to be able to chart the future of what a country is trying to get to. And if today X country decides to wake up and say, I'm no longer exporting, what does that do to the rest of the world? And you look at the Ukraine and Russia war, the way that caused a lot of chaos within Europe. And that was all across the board, from the prices of ammonium nitrate to the electricity and gas that you're trying to get, that you had agreements, but now you're no longer part of that agreement. Now the people within your country are struggling. So I think it serves such a basic underlying part of what the government and how a country functions, that mining is going to continue playing a very pivotal role, and even more important role going forward into the future.
So you guys both mentioned, mining, and then you also talked about, I would say in a broader context, natural resources, right? That would even include oil and gas, electricity, etc. But when I look at where mining is actually happening and the state of those countries, and then what you guys are saying here, this is a safe base, I'm not fighting anybody, okay? We're all friends here. But when you say, it's a big contributor to the economy, it's very important, it gets jobs. But I'm looking at the countries that have these mines, and unemployment rate is at double digits. I'm looking at infrastructure in those countries being, little to non-existent, education systems falling apart, the list goes on. And I'm not a politician, but the math's not mathing, essentially. True. Why do you think that is?
I would say there are a number of dimensions to that. Firstly, when countries are endowed with natural resources, they tend to suffer from so-called Dutch disease. The Dutch disease is resource curse, if you put it in another way, because most of the countries who were endowed were colonized.
Yeah.
Okay. And unfortunately, that mentality, of the resource curse still persists today. And that leads to its own specific issues. One, the resource curse theory indicates that there's a few very wealthy group of people that benefit from the resources, and the large masses of population within, the countries where these resources are being exploited are left in extreme poverty. And that's what the resource curse thesis is about. So that's the first thing. Africa and a lot of other countries, for that matter, still suffer from that. The second issue related to that is the fact that there are very poor governance structures that can actually regulate all of the activities in those industries. I know you quoted some facts and said that the math doesn't add up. Okay, that's true. Because in majority of the mining destinations, that's what the statistics actually tell us. But there are cases that shine out as bright stars where it is actually working, okay, and the numbers and the stats actually prove that it's working. So the mining activities and operations are actually benefiting those economies. And if you look at those countries, you look at Norway, for example, they have good governance, okay, very well regulated, strong policies, and they make sure that there is adherence to governance and policy. I feel that there's a lesson to be learned from that without, the necessary governance, not just the regulation, without the necessary governance and those instruments to manage the, mining industry within these economies, that's when you end up with the types of, cases that you just brought up now, where economies, large swathes of people are left in poverty, high unemployment, etc.
So I want to maybe play a bit of a devil in this conversation, because if you look at quite a lot of mining companies, they would form a large part of the contribution to the GDP within any country. They would actually physically be handing over a lot of money to the government, and then the question then becomes to the governance piece, like, what then do they do with that money? And so I do believe there are two parts to it, obviously, where the country or the company that is coming into the country, the conditions of how they engage need to be well thought out, as well as representative of being able to give back, but also being able to contribute. Maybe it's not, giving back is not the word, because they have to run a business. And so I look at maybe Botswana as an example. Botswana have gone into an agreement with a private entity, and they then look to share within the benefits. And recently they've restructured how that benefit looks like, so that it is more favorable towards the host country as well as the company. But at the end of the day, it needs to make business sense. So, and to make it make business sense, it has to have that longevity, because mining is a high risk, high rewards. Today the price is up, tomorrow the price might be low, and you have to be able to carry all of those moments as a business. And so I look at it, if I'm running a business, a mining corporation, the first question is, am I going to make enough money? And is this place where I'm going to put my money likely to give me the best return compared to anywhere else? And for me, the governance piece plays a massive underlying structure to that. Like, I will struggle to put money in, and therefore I will struggle to be able to make it as beneficial to a wider community. And you always find lots of companies will do corporate social responsibility. They will do all these things where you build roads, help hospitals, clinics, and they all contribute. And so at times, I don't know whether we're looking for a large silver shining plaque that says, I have built this university and I have sent so many people and I've now lifted the whole country up, from a private corporation that's actually trying to just run a business. Or are we, and in doing that, we then absolve governments from doing what they're supposed to? Or is that the other side, where it's companies are not forming the best balance in terms of an agreement between the host country and what they can get, and therefore they make returns upwards of 50%, or you're getting ridiculous returns relative to risk, and at the end of the day you just you don't contribute as much. And I love a quote that goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I might be in this space, but if I don't lift everyone around, then I'm going to have social unrest and a whole bunch of issues associated to running this operation. So I think I don't know if it's a simple, straightforward answer that the math is not mathing. I think they're really good examples, and I think both parties need to play a part to make it math.
Excellent point.
The math is not mathing, guys. No, but I hear you. It's definitely, it sounds a lot more complicated than just, math not mathing. And also depending on the context, where's that company operating? What does that government structure look like? Which leads me to, ESG, right? So we talked about, the environment, social.
Now, this might be where the math doesn't math. I can agree.
Well, you talked about corporate governance, and you talked about, how the government works. You talked about social responsibility. Yes, so I just thought, since we're here, we might as well. So a lot of younger people are very against mining. You see protests around the world, we don't want you to mine in this area. A lot of organizations haven't even done stuff, because of the results of protests. And they'll be tweeting that through the phones that would not be in their hands if it wasn't for mining. Yeah. So I'd just like to maybe talk a little bit about that very fine balance between, ESG and we don't want mining, and the reality of how important it is for us to maybe look at sustainable mining, if that's even a thing, and if you can maybe even touch on like greenwashing and what you guys have seen, not only in mining, but even in oil and gas, etc.
Yeah. Okay. I go?
You can go, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start with a short thing firstly,
Okay.
and then I'll let you go. So I think it's we want to live in a fairy tale sometimes, where our actions and the consequences of our actions are completely separated from each other. If I want to have I want to have an electric vehicle, I want to have all these consumer aspects that we surround ourselves with, I think I have to also be cognizant that that is going to require mining. And so if I am going to be going out and protesting, and I won't use any examples, but we know many.
Who is sponsoring you? Why are we not using it?
No, but so look,
it's okay. You don't have to use examples.
I followed a case around Panama, right, where they closed down a mine, and that's the first mine that was within Panama, and it was producing a lot of copper, probably about 1% of the GDP. 1% of the world's copper. And there were major concerns around the impact on an environmental basis. When you take the conversation in the snippets that exist on social media, you would believe that there's absolutely nothing that's being done for the environment, or that the environment is significantly worse off than what they found it to be. But when you go into some of the details and you go in a bit deeper, you see that there's a lot of work that's actually been going on. And so the conversations need to not be sort of an emotional one, that yes, you're digging a hole, but as you dig a hole, there are controls that are possible to put in place to try to make sure that you minimize the impact, or you regenerate spaces and or ecosystems that allow for life to thrive and flourish over and beyond how you might have found it anyways. So I think the conversations are very emotional when you do that. But if I'm going to be emotional, then I should also marry the fact that I use a phone to that emotion, that I'm the one causing that demand for that supply. If I didn't, then fine, let's not do these things. Then there's no supply, the business model falls apart. And so the real protest for me is, don't get the phone, don't get these things. And then we can start to talk about, then it's a natural process where there is no demand, therefore there's no supply, therefore there's no need for mines. But we can't have it both ways, where we say, I want the phone, but I don't want you to mine. And I think that just falls the whole thing altogether. So how do you balance the two? We just have to be as practical about it and carry both sides of that argument. And I do believe that mines and or other businesses can always do more, push themselves more towards not having that negative impact or minimizing impact. And that requires not only the governments, but the corporations to be able to step forward and implement, even if it might not be, I guess, there's a wider benefit, not just the commercial benefit of making money now, but the sustainability of being able to make money for the next 40 years, 50 years, if you completely obliterate the ecosystem and environment that you live and work in. That's a short version of what I was trying to say. That's a long version of what I thought I was not going to say.
Leadership isn't just about making decisions. It's about adapting, inspiring, and leading with confidence in a fast-changing world. At Transformation Leader, we equip you with the skills to master self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and resilience. Lead high-performing teams, navigate workplace dynamics, and drive real impact in your career and business. The future belongs to those who embrace change, future-proof your leadership, and take control of your success. Start your journey today. Sign up now at t4leader.com and become the leader the future demands.
Well, a lot of companies are being, not persecuted, but are being called out on greenwashing. So you're saying that, yes, this particular company may be doing some stuff, but they're big organizations that say they're doing stuff. And maybe, I don't know, is the mathing there? Are they doing stuff?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we don't just limit the conversation to mining companies, if we look at resource extraction in general, you'll find that. And we have cases in our backyard in the Niger Delta. The Niger Delta is predominantly an area that prior, to the oil and gas industry taking that area over, was basically providing opportunities for subsistence, farming, fishing mainly. And after large corporations like Shell, for example, operate there, they're not the only one. A lot of other oil majors that operate there. And if you see, I've personally seen a helicopter view of what the Delta actually looks like. It's horrendous. I mean, it doesn't look at all like a natural ecosystem. It's like a black kind of sea of oil with all of the spillages and all of that taking place. So there is some very bad stuff that is going on. In the case of Nigeria, I mean, they've now imposed huge fines on those organizations, but unfortunately, they haven't resolved the actual issue.
Yeah.
Okay. As you mentioned, if you look at it pragmatically, companies, especially these large corporations, need to do a lot more to basically prove to the rest of the world that they are not just greenwashing and that they have a genuine concern for environmental and ESG type, of concerns. Also, there's a lot happening at the moment in terms of, companies realigning their strategies and their portfolios of the assets that they have. Very large mining companies like Anglo American, for example, has over the last few years divested from their dirty assets, the coal assets. They've divested them. And it's a step in the right direction. And we look at, that as a trend, it's increasing. Earlier this year, towards the end of last year, BHP Billiton, the largest mining company in the world, approached Anglo American to acquire their assets. But part of that agreement for acquiring the assets was that we don't want to acquire your dirty assets. Yeah. Okay, so you must get rid of your dirty assets. We want your copper assets in South America. We want all of your other assets which are perceived as clean. So that kind of conversation is happening in boardrooms of mining companies and oil and gas companies all around the world. So there is a concerted effort by the organizations, to be fair to them, in actually, steering that conversation to the right direction. But coming to, the Gen Z and what they tweet, I said a lot of that comes, from emotion. And I'm a baby boomer, so very far away from the Gen Z population. The Gen Z is always looking for, so what's the next best thing that's trending? Yeah. And if it's greenwashing, then, let me jump on that bandwagon and start tweeting about it. I'm not saying that what they tweet about and the issues they raise are not real. Yeah. They are real, but like you said, you need to look at it pragmatically, and you need to basically balance the conversation and not become too emotionally involved in it. Protest action and all of that is necessary. That is ultimately what puts pressure on the different stakeholders to do something about it. Okay. If it wasn't for that, we would have never ended apartheid in South Africa. So you need that kind of action and pressure to be put. And the Gen Z population plays an integral role in doing that. Because me, for example, in my generation, I'm not accustomed to doing that. Okay? But the Gen Z can do that.
Yeah. And you know, the thing about, I think sometimes what happens is that people want to get behind a movement, but then they lack the structure of how to get behind the movement. So is it more practical to ban mining altogether? Or is it more practical to put legislation in mining that holds people to greater account?
Yeah.
And those two are very different worlds. But if you're emotional about it, you'll go completely on the extreme end, and then you'll just ban mining, and then you've done nothing to progress the need that exists, and also how you contribute to making the entire industry a better industry. And I think that, for me, protest, hell yes. But now the boomers or other people need to be able to provide those options as to, this is one way of going around it, this is another, and maybe as you protest, jump into the bandwagon that's more targeted, and that's going to get you an actual result that is actually balanced in terms of its argument. I had a question though. Do we think that, and it's slightly controversial, so we might have to cut it out. Do we feel that some of the whitewashing and some of the
Greenwashing,
sorry. Some of the greenwashing and some of the practices that result in damage to the environment only happen because it's based in Africa? Would it happen to that same extent if it was a European country? And if the answer is it's a difference because it's in Africa, is that because of the way that Africa is perceived, and therefore the companies don't necessarily step up to the mark, and or because the governance is not necessarily there to be able to enforce somebody to be on the mark that has been set? Yeah. Like I said, it's controversial, so we can cut this out if it goes left.
But I'd like to respond to that. I don't think it's controversial.
Yeah.
But I do think there's two sides to the coin. Mm-hmm. One is there is an element of truth in the fact that because it happens in Africa, that a lot of this gets tolerated and is accepted. But that could also apply to large European manufacturers that have their manufacturing sites in Indonesia or in Malaysia or in Bangladesh, which is one of the poorest countries. But yet, a popular brand from the US or from Europe may be perceived as maintaining high ESG standards and being compliant, but yet the very product and where it's being sourced from is being done in the most unethical manner. So it kind of, like I said, you have both sides of the coin.
But then now, is it, because everyone is in a race for maximizing profit.
Profits, yeah.
Right? So you will go to the place of least resistance. Now,
of course.
I would.
Now, is it therefore a bad thing? Or how then do we drive that change to say, okay, within Africa, we need to be here? Is it the company's prerogative, or is it governance, or is it...
And it boils down to governance to quite a large extent. Yeah. In the boardroom, there's no doubt if you sit around the executive boardroom with executives from mining companies or oil and gas companies, the eye is on the balance sheet. Yeah. Okay, so seeking opportunities to reduce costs and strengthen the balance sheet and get financial leverage. That's really where the focus in mines, and these companies are in business to make money.
Yeah.
So it's not,
It's a for-profit organization,
Exactly.
not a charity,
It
not
is
an
a for-profit
NGO.
organization, 100%.
Yeah.
But the responsibility lies to a large extent also on governance mechanisms within, the mining locations.
Yeah.
Let me give you a good example. Africa is supposed to subscribe to the extractive industries transparency regulation, right? Where they need to declare all of these, the assets, how it's being sourced, etc., etc. But how many countries in Africa actually signed up for EATI? Very few.
Yeah.
So who's to be blamed for that? Not the mining company.
No.
It's the governments in those countries.
Yeah.
So even though there are regulations and there are governance mechanisms, if the government or the state or the regulatory authorities flout them and decide not to pursue them,
That's what you get. That's what you end
That's
So
up.
what you
maybe
end up
that's what people should be protesting about, is why isn't the government signing up on something that's going to protect, the assets,
Exactly,
the environment, the people, the communities. Yeah.
And that transparency, because I think a large part of it, and I love your example where you talked about from a helicopter view, you're seeing an ocean of oil.
the physical impact of
And I think there's a level of it that has got to do with the lack of transparency.
Yeah.
So we just go, well, I've got the oil, it's done. But how many people see that and therefore get that that need to then move the conversation from it being theoretical in nature versus it being actually changed and something actually happening. And I mean, the Niger Delta is an age-old area in terms of the issues and problems associated to oil spills and or the degradation of the ecosystem. But then do we sometimes put it aside? Do we move on with life? And how do we make sure it's as transparent as possible? We have done this, we're measuring this, this is what the outcome is, and keeping it front and center the same way that we were keeping COVID numbers front and center.
I think sorry, go ahead.
And it's not, take the Niger Delta example again. So large major oil company was neglectful, and destroyed the ecosystem. But what was the government's response?
Yeah.
Impose fine. Where did that money go? I mean, you're talking about billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it's gone into the state coffers. Did those communities or those fishermen or those people who should be the real beneficiaries of the devastation that has happened in their community, they got nothing out of it. Right? So, sometimes, there's a response from the government, but it's not the correct response. And it doesn't remedy the problem. It just perpetuates the situation.
I mean, because if it's a fine, you'll pay a fine as long as it won't make you bankrupt. It will.
But there's no rehabilitation.
Yes.
Which is something else we can talk about in the mining space, because if you talk about greenwashing in particular, that's an area that's being neglected.
Yeah.
So when you talk about things like, do mining companies in Africa treat the African context worse off than, or maybe let's not say African countries, but developing countries versus developed countries? And I don't know if you know this phrase of it's a first world problem. And that's not by accident.
Yeah.
In the States, I remember, I think it was BP. There was a big spill in the Gulf, and it was all over the news. It was a big deal. It was off the coast of Florida. And, we had college students going out there washing birds and all that stuff to just try and rehabilitate. And also, like, people died. It was a very big deal. But I think that in that context, a lot of people can do stuff about it because you have like 4% unemployment rate, and you have food in your belly, and you do look at the internet and you can go, oh, what cause am I going to support? And it's not as wishy-washy as that, but there's a lot more time, I think, to actually look at stuff like that. And I just wonder, in developing countries, and I'm not saying this in a disrespectful way, I just wonder why, for example, when COVID happened, I would go to some developing countries and people weren't wearing masks. They were just going on with their business as best they could, as best as government regulations let them. But in developed countries, it was like, real lockdown, where if you are not with a mask on, it's a big deal, et cetera, et cetera. And I look at it like, maybe in the developed countries, you have real problems like Ebola and TB. And even though those aren't, monkeypox are not necessarily real problems in the sense that if you had access to medication or vaccines, it shouldn't actually be a problem. But the fact is that that's what you're focusing on. The fact that you can get cholera from borehole water. So maybe I'm not really fussed about the mining company, what they're doing, because, my uncle's in the mining company and he's the one who gave me money to go to school. And I think that when I ask you guys, like, how do you find the balance? And when I think you guys mention, like, be less emotional, look at it pragmatically, those are the sorts of things that I'm expecting people to actually, at least in developing countries, like, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's fair, and I'm definitely saying, like, put pressure to put those policies in place. But I just wonder if the reason those things are not being in place is because there are other, in the Maslow hierarchy, there are other things that are more pressing than, is this mine rehabilitating this land, or, do I have food for my family? In those very pragmatic stages. And I just want to segue into, how do you guys think technology can be leveraged to maybe answer some of these challenges that we're facing in the mining industry, from, extraction to selling it to an end user, and it turns into your computer. It's, the copper that's lighting this studio that we're in, because it's in everything. And I don't think people understand, it's not just your phone, it's the microphone I'm speaking into, it's the electric door, like it's everything. So yeah, I'm just curious as to what you guys think, how tech can help with that.
No, absolutely. I think tech plays a fundamental role, not just in mining and in all industries, but more so in mining, because the critical minerals that are being mined are pervasive. It's everywhere. I mean, you step into your car, you use your mic, your phone, or your computer. I mean, there's critical minerals in there. But if you look at the mining value chain, tech plays a very crucial role across the mining value chain, from the exploration phase through to extraction, through to transportation, through to demand and supply chain planning, supply chain management, right through to sales and marketing, and even right through to the back office. Okay, so I'd like to say that, or use the term, technology enables the entire value chain from the pit to the port, okay, or from the pit to the customer, actually. Mm-hmm. And there are many ways in which technology is actually helping, not just in the ESG kind of space. You spoke about mining companies being in business to make money and to generate profit, okay. It's tough to build a mine. I mean, it's a 20, 30-year life cycle. Okay, it's not a pop-up store. So you need a lot of planning that goes into that. So you need to do a lot of feasibility studies. It's a very data-intensive operation. The moment you talk about data, that's where the tech actually comes in. I mean, in all of these different operations, they rely very heavily on data. Geological data, you have terabytes of data that you have to process to develop a mine plan, to determine how feasible it actually is to do that. Today, with the advent of, the advanced tech that we have, with the AI built into this tech, what used to take mine planners and strategists months to come up with, they can churn out in a matter of less than an hour.
Yeah.
And so, it enhances productivity. Mining is a very volatile space, not in terms of the physical volatility, but in terms of the market dynamics. How does a mine ensure that it can be sustainable and remain profitable in a market that is so volatile, where the prices are fluctuating almost on a per second or an hourly basis? We use tech to actually do that. The tech can actually forecast what the future projections of the market prices will actually be like, and then allow you or your company to actually take risk-aversive actions like, buying future contracts or hedging, your positions to ensure that you don't take a knock when the commodity price all of a sudden drops. And I've just given you very simple examples, but those are the types of technologies that are making an impact.
And I think to add to that, it's there's a lot of information, and the thing about mining is that there are many variables. So you have got the market conditions, you've got the government, you've got the ore body, you've got the way the ore body presents itself, you've got the additional minerals that sit within the minerals that you're looking to get, and then you've got people, and then you've got the geography of the land, and all of these things are variable aspects that we need to be able to figure out and compute and then see patterns so that we can minimize the risk that comes with the next step that we take. And so whether it is an exploration and you really churn all the variables to then decide that my next step, in order to minimize the risk of not finding copper or not finding gold, not finding the mineral, is by drilling these 3 holes, because that is the gap in my model. And those things are the way that technology is impacting mining. And it means that what used to be a 20-year life to get a mine from exploration to production can start shrinking down to something a bit smaller. And that means less money and capital upfront spent just shooting darts in the hole, trying to figure it out by mere brute force, because that's what it was. Brute force. I'm going to lay a drilling pattern. I'm just going to drill the hell out of this and then build the model. Or I'm going to do it in an iterative way that gives me more insight every step of the way, that then informs the next step that I take. And then when you now move to running the mine, humans are probably the hardest things to manage. I would every day, any day, prefer to be in a manufacturing store where you press the button and it moves from A to B, and it does it seamlessly. But the introduction, or the fact that we have humans and this being labor intensive, means that you have to be able to manage people and performance manage people and motivate people, and all of those things. Technology can form a basis as to how you do that, how you gain that insight to do that better, to do that more precisely. And then essentially, HR analytics is an example of something that's massive within the medical sphere. And the thing about a mine is that a mine consists of the medical sphere plus everything else, because you're usually out in a remote space. So how you implement every component of all of these things, I think it just makes the visibility of people running a business that much more transparent. So I always look at it as, if I'm running a business, it's like looking down a hose pipe, like a pipe, or a poly pipe. You want to be able to see from this end to the end, from the start to the end, and you want to be able to see every point in which a variable or light or water comes in, so that you can know that 50 meters from now, I need to plug that hole. And I need to plug that hole because I can see the entire business in a funnel. Because if you don't, you can get inundated with a lot of different noises that some are important, some are not, but you won't know the difference between what is important and what is not, or what is a problem and what is not a problem. If you don't leverage technology, you don't use information to just declutter the world that is a very highly variable, highly volatile space that you're working in. And even to add to that, so that's sort of almost the data and sort of side of it, but just making people safer just by using technology, where you don't now have to have people doing dangerous things or in the line of fire. You are able to now mechanize a process that means that where people used to, I'll say, fall asleep while driving trucks, there's technology that exists now that minimizes the possibility of that happening. And that just means it's a space that is you're more likely to get home after a day's worth of work today than you were 10 years ago, because technology is making sure it's safeguarding your ability to get back home. And I think how we leverage that and how much we push technology to be able to protect us, to be able to increase productivity, to be able to help us with visibility, means that your costs drop, your productivity increases. And sometimes we're afraid of change, and the mining industry is so traditional that that becomes now the opportunity that we miss. If we don't push for the change, we miss out on benefit.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, the mining industry specifically is extremely conservative when it comes to adopting new types of technologies. They use traditional technologies that they've been used to for many years, and will not very easily succumb to just accepting a new technology. And then there's also the stigma associated with the fact that, you know, if you try to remove the human out of the harsh environment, ensuring that he can get back to his family safe home. He may get back home to his family, but he may be without a job.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you maintain that balance to ensure that, you know, technology doesn't proliferate the operation in such a way that it actually destroys the human fabric of an organization? So, you know, that raises other ethical kinds of concerns. But when it comes to safety, I think that must be top priority. If there's an opportunity to take a worker out of harm's way by using technology, then that must be done. I mean, there's no, you know, argument about